In the farthest reaches of Siberia, where the land is white for most of the year and silence presses down like a living thing, there stood a small wooden house at the edge of the forest. The woman inside was 80 years old, her back bent by time, her hands rough from decades of chopping wood and hauling water. She had outlived her husband, her friends, and even the village itself. Winter temperatures plunged to -71 degrees, cold so brutal it could crack trees and stop breath in seconds. Out there, nothing survived alone for long, human or animal. That night, the woman had just finished feeding her stove when she heard a sound she had never heard before. Not a knock, not a howl, something closer to a low, trembling huff. The walls of her house seemed to shiver with it. She froze, heart pounding, because she knew that sound. Bears still roamed these forests. Everyone knew to stay hidden if one came close. But this sound wasn't angry. It wasn't hungry. It sounded afraid. She wrapped her shawl tighter and moved toward the door, every instinct screaming at her to stop. When she opened it, the frozen air rushed in like a blade. Standing in the snow was a massive brown bear, her fur crusted with ice, her breath coming out in desperate clouds. The bear did not roar, she did not charge. Instead, she stepped forward slowly and lowered her head. In her arms, if they could be called arms, was a tiny cub, limp and shivering, its breath so faint it was almost invisible. For a long moment, the world stood still. An old woman and a wild bear stared at each other across a thin wooden threshold. The woman felt fear, yes, but beneath it was something stronger: recognition. She had been a mother once. She had held a sick child through long nights, praying to anything that would listen. When she looked into the bear's eyes, she did not see a beast. She saw the same terror she had once seen in her own reflection. The bear gently pushed the cub forward, placing it on the packed snow near the door. Then she stepped back. It was not an attack, it was an offering, or maybe a request. The woman's hands trembled as she bent down and touched the cub's fur, ice cold. The little body barely moved. Without thinking anymore, she scooped the cub up and pulled it inside, slamming the door shut behind her. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she had just signed her own death sentence. But the bear did not break the door. She did not roar. Instead, she sat outside, her huge shape pressed into the snow, waiting. Inside, the woman moved with the urgency of someone who knew time was running out. She laid the cub near the stove, wrapped it in old blankets, and rubbed its tiny paws to bring back circulation. She warmed water, mixed a little honey, and gently touched it to the cub's mouth. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, the cub let out a weak sound, a thin, fragile whimper. The woman laughed and cried at the same time. All through the night, she worked. She fed the cub, warmed it, whispered to it like she once whispered to her children. Outside, the bear remained, unmoving, enduring the killing cold with nothing but trust holding her there. At dawn, pale light crept through the frost-covered window. The cub stirred, lifted its head, and blinked. The woman opened the door slowly. The bear rose instantly, eyes locked on the bundle in the woman's arms. Carefully, gently, the woman placed the cub back onto the snow. The mother bear rushed forward, sniffing, nudging, checking every breath. When she was sure, when she knew, the bear did something no one in the village would ever believe. She bowed her head. Then, just before turning back toward the forest, the bear looked once more at the old woman. There was no fear in her eyes now, only gratitude. With her cub clutched tightly, she disappeared into the trees, leaving nothing but tracks in the snow and a story that would never leave that woman's heart. The old woman stood in the doorway long after the forest swallowed them. The cold bit at her face, but she didn't feel it. In a land where survival was a daily battle, a wild creature had chosen trust over instinct, and an old woman, long forgotten by the world, had been reminded that even at 80 years old, her hands were still capable of saving a life. In the deadliest cold on Earth, something warmer than fire had passed between human and beast that night. And for the rest of her days, whenever the wind howled through the Siberian trees, the woman smiled, knowing that somewhere out there a bear and her cub were alive because love, in the end, recognized itself.